Also, I want to mention there's several reports distributed to everyone today, so take those and a lot of times there's annual reports or yearly reports that come to Ways and Means, so this is some of the reports that have showed up so far. At this time, we're going to have a briefing by staff on the House Appropriations Committee, budget actions so far. We'll have Dylan Deere, Legislative Research Department. Dylan, welcome committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dylan Deere. I'm the Assistant Director for Fiscal Affairs. And the Chairman asked me to give you a briefing on where House Appropriations is right now, and maybe a little bit of a presentation about the budget process so far. So as you know, everyone knows here, the development of the budget recommendation began during the interim this year through the 2024 Special Committee on Legislative Budget. That position was developed starting with the agency request as the base. And then there was some other minor adjustments, and that was codified in House Bill 2007. And that bill is currently traveling through the House, and the plan is to report that out of the House in mid-February at this point, at which point it will be considered by the Senate. All plans are subject to change, but that's my best knowledge at this time as far as the budget process is concerned. I have put out some documents for you. I'm going to talk very briefly about the new legislative budget summary, just so you kind of know what the documents are that we are making available on our website today, so that you can go out there and you can see them and review them and begin the process of asking questions. I have also put two different, they look very similar, sorry. Two different legal-sized landscape documents in front of you. One says all funds at the top. That is obviously all funds. The other one doesn't say that. It's state general fund. Okay, and I'm probably going to be speaking from the shorter one. It's about 9 pages. It'll be the state general fund here in a few minutes. I had to make a decision about whether or not to default to giving you a very detailed view or just giving you a really generic overview. I decided to put the detailed view in your hands. That way you can ask questions and we can begin that process of back and forth as far as what's inside of this budget. I will not be going over this in detail today. I'm just going to show you what it is and how it works, and then you can ask questions of any of our fiscal team. Our fiscal team, anybody who's not in another committee, will be here and available to answer questions today. So starting with the legislative budget summary, I chose the legislature because I wrote this budget summary, so I'm familiar with it. The way this works is if you turn to page 2. All right, at the top you have the approved FY, if you look, and I'm talking about in that box that says budget analysis, in the middle is figure 4. You start with that approved budget from last year, that's 2024 SB 28 and House Bill 2551. That creates the base. Then if you have state general fund, it'll have SGF reappropriations. Then we have a line in here for supplementals, or in the next year, it'll be enhancements. And so that's anything that has been identified by an agency as being a supplemental or enhancement. Okay, so they actually have to identify it in the system as either a supplemental or enhancement. And then if you go to other changes, it's all the other changes in their budget that gets them to the agency request. And each one of those items is numbered, okay? And so those numbers correspond to text that follows it. All right, so it's pretty straightforward. Here you can see you have $7.8 million in reappropriations. The Legislative Budget Committee only recommended $830,000 of those reappropriations. So they reduced that level of reappropriation. And we have recorded all of those House Bill 2007 / Legislative Budget Committee recommendations inside this document. So when you get it, you'll be able to see what's in 2007, okay, and also what the original agency starting point was. All right. Then you have the all other adjustments. It talks about that. In FY26, it works down the exact same way. Here you have on page 4, inside figure 7, you have the approved budget. You have a enhancement request for a Chief Information Security Officer, a CISO. And then you have all the other various changes that get you to the agency request. And then we have a little bit of historical data on the back all right? Like the 10-year table, CPIU changes. Depending upon the agency, you might see some additional supporting material in these documents. For special revenue funded agencies, you'll have special revenue fund tables. For your fee funded agencies, we'll have fee fund tables and historical fees that are charged, statutory fees that are charged. So there'll be some additional supplemental materials depending upon the agency, but that'll be the general framework in which we present these budgets for your review and consideration here in another couple of weeks. So that is the basic framework. This is different than the BA, so it's different than the budget analysis. Given the compressed time frame, we have sort of provided you more of an overview or summary document, and these are all the core elements that we often get asked about, and so we try to boil it down to just those things we get asked about on a regular basis. But this is an ongoing process to develop and improve these documents. So if there's something you don't see here that you find really valuable, let us know, and we can have a conversation about updating our documents. So before I go into the actual document itself, the House Bill 2000, well, let me ask if there's any questions. Are there any questions on this? Most people who are on the interim committee are pretty darn familiar with it. The only big change is adding in the LBC regs.
Questions? Senator Petty.
And I was on the interim, but so did we, with the budget starting base, did that include the salary increases that should have already, that would been built in?
Mr. Chairman, it did. So in the approved budget, okay, that was approved out of last year, those were already built into that I shouldn't get into jargon, but it's already been built into the approved budget. So what happened is that it went to the State Finance Council. The State Finance Council approved the distribution of those funds in cooperation between KLRD and the Division of Budget, mostly Division of Budget. Those funds were distributed out to the various state agencies, and then we added those to their approved level of expenditures. So technically, if you were to compare the number that state agencies left with in the spring to the number that's showing up as the approved, it's going to be slightly higher by the amount of those salary adjustments, because those are technically part of the approved. They were approved inside a different section of the bill, and the State Finance Council approved their distributions.
This is a follow-up.
Senator Petty.
So would that not, I mean, I'm asking this because I was looking at a budget. Would that not include if there were increases in health insurance?
So good question. And that is in the other changes section. So if you look at page 2 on this document, see item number 4 that says all other adjustments. All right. So if they had things like in FY 2025, you're not going to see a lot of fringe benefit changes because we largely knew what their fringe benefit costs were going to be in the current fiscal year. But those, if you had like group health insurance adjustments, because group health insurance is actually dependent upon elections made by the employees. So an employer's cost for like group health insurance will vary depending upon whether or not you're in a family or you're single, stuff like that. So you'll see those in that line item 4, any other adjustments that are needed to pay for those fringes. And you'll see the same thing in FY 2026, all right? You'll see often an all other adjustments line, and that's going to pay for CAPERS rate increases, group health insurance adjustments, or any other fringe adjustments that are inside of the budget. And the purpose of that is really just to cover for all of those what are called budget cost indices, all right, which are distributed by the Division of Budget, and indicate how much all your base costs are going up year over year. And you'll often find it in that line. Occasionally, we'll have broken it out. If it's a particularly large number, we'll have broken it out and pointed out individually.
Thank you.
Other question? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dylan. This is very helpful. I'm looking at page 6, which is the 10-year expenditure history of SGF. And to me, this just kind of summarizes our expenditures, obviously, for the last 10 years. And if I'm looking at this right, in the last 10 years, we've increased SGF expenditures 80%, correct?
That's correct.
And while the CPIU has been at 33%. So we've increased nearly 50% our spending out of SGF over CPIU. Nearly 50%. And if you look at I just want to make sure I understand this, from FY 2020, from FY 2020 to the agency FY 2026, we've doubled are SGF expenditures. Am I reading that correctly?
You are, and that is an absolute correct interpretation of the data that's on this table, ma'am. I would note that all things have nuance. So if we look at this table, and we're talking about the legislature's budget in particular, if you look at FY 2017 through FY 2022, we go the total SGF spend goes down, okay, over that period of time. All right, so it actually decreases by $300,000. And then you see a real sort of acceleration. It jumps to 21 and then to 26. And those were, for FY 2024, and then to 33 and 35. And there were policy changes that were made during that period of time. There was some new monies put into the budget for the constituent management relationship systems and monies put in for legislative salary adjustments. So those two different policies adjusted it. There's another issue, and it's something I always try to caution people in. If you look at the longitudinal data, it is important to look at that 25 and 26 agency request, okay? But really focus on that last 24 actual. So what you see is going from 2017 through 2024, you have a 20.5% increase. There's also some policies that are happening in 25 and 26. But the legislature tends to carry in its balance a relatively large SGF reappropriation. That's not just over caution, it's because we never know how long the legislative session is going to last. So, we may be out of here in, late April, or we may be out of here on June 30th. Hopefully not June 30th. So the idea is, and so there you have to pay your various staff and committee assistant session staff for that period of time. So there is a relatively large SGF reappropriation that you'll see in 25 and 26. But if that doesn't end up getting expended, it falls out in the actual expenditures.
Senator Erickson.
Would that not have been true for previous years, going back to 2017 and previously? So is this apples to apples as far as reappropriations? That policy has not changed?
So in each year you budget it, but if you don't have that extended session, you don't spend it. So in the actuals, it goes away, all right? But you'll see it in 25 and you'll see it in sort of 26, particularly in 25. Really, you see it in 25, that reappropriation, of course, which has now been lapsed at the recommendation of the Legislative Budget Committee. And in 26, you're really looking at legislative salaries right there, that legislative salary plan, the full year's implementation. That's about $7.5 million.
Other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that topic, Mr. Deere, with the change in the legislator's salary not being a daily salary, wouldn't that change if we extended the session as you are requesting to June the 30th? Oh, maybe
I don't remember saying it quite that way, but so it will. And in fact, the need to carry such a large reappropriation will go down. But what you will still have expenses for in an extended session is the various committee assistants. We don't keep all committee assistants, when we run really late. But there are various session expenses that only occur when the legislators are in the building. And so those expenses will continue to be incurred, and they do show up in the legislative budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Seeing none?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I go into this document, there's going to be a lot of line-by-line items that are in here, but the changes made inside of House Bill 2007 are actually really easy to sort of categorize, all right? And that's the interim committee recommended that all enhancements and supplementals be deleted, so upfront. So that's anything that was identified by an agency as an enhancement or supplemental is removed. If it's identified as a global salary adjustment, okay, those items are also eliminated. So that doesn't mean that if some individual received a pay bump because they received a promotion, those aren't removed. So those are, individual specific. It's if an agency asked for like a global 2.5% salary adjustment, those have been eliminated. Adds of personnel, which are discrete and could be identified, those have been removed. Occasionally you don't see a deletion if you see in a budget summary like add 2.2 FTE positions, but that 2.2 is a summation of a deletion of 3 people here and 5 people here and 7 people here and adding 2 people here and adding 3 people here. Then it's no single person, it's a bunch of fractional people, and you really it's very difficult to delete in those situations. There's 2 other major adjustments. A large portion of the SGF reappropriations were lapsed. You may be aware, but this year, there was about $619 million in SGF reappropriations. The agencies have already lapsed the majority of that, but the committee did recommend some additional lapses. They've also made some additional adjustments to the Economic Development Initiatives Fund. All right, and inside those EDIF adjustments, it brought that fund back into balance. That fund would have had a negative balance absent a transfer from the state general fund into the EDIF in FY25 and FY26. So with that stated, I'm going to sort of talk to you about the document you see before you. All right. So this document compares the agency request to the 2007 position to the House Appropriations position as of January 24th, 2025. All right. And you might ask, where is the governor's recommendation in each one of these? And what I would say is that we have been requested by the House Appropriations Chair, and I assume we'll get the same request here. There is a series of yellow sheets, okay, that we pass out in addition to the budget summary, like this, and that contains each one of the adjustments that have been recommended by the governor that are not already contained inside of House Bill 2007. So both the budget committees and the House Appropriations Committee will have the opportunity to adopt those recommendations into their budget process. All right, back to the sheet. So if this is Department of Agriculture, this is organized by function. So first we start Ag and Natural Resources, then Education about in the middle of the page. And then you show Department of Agriculture. The total request, okay, is $15.1 million, all right, for the Department of Agriculture, all right, in FY 2025 from SGF only. And the total request in 26 is 17.3. There has been an adjustment in 26. So the first thing you see is that agency requested budget. You can almost think of that as like a sort of a budget allocation. It's not a budget allocation. That's not it technically, but it's sort of the base budget. It's their ongoing operating costs. And these are the various adjustments that they have requested. So they've requested a variety of enhancements, and in most cases, we've broken those up. Animal health veterinarian, meat and poultry staffing demands, sorghum investment program, and water structures inspectors. All right. And this is the short title that we're using to track these various adjustments. All right. You can see that none of these had an SGF portion. There was no adjustments, and so those have flown through in the budget, except for most of them actually occur in FY26. So you have $150,000, $350,000, $1 million in sorghum, and $650,000, okay, for these various adjustments. All right, and they've gone through inside of the total because none of these items were identified as an enhancement by the agency, and therefore they are still inside of the budget at this point. The only adjustment that was made was the deletion of enhancements. That deletes about $2.2 million, okay, inside of the Department of Agriculture's budget, and so that adjusts the total. So what you can see is for the Department of Agriculture, the total budget goes from 15.2, okay, deletes that, and so it goes from 17.3 to 15.2. So about, $2.2 million of a reduction. And that's going to follow all the way through this document with that same sort of structure. So you go agency requested budget and adjustments. I'd really like to point out for the Department of Wildlife and Parks, we've tried to identify these reappropriations lapses. So anytime there's been a reappropriations lapse, it'll show up with that language, and then it'll show up as a negative. That means that in that particular case, those amount of funds have been removed from their budget. And if you look in the column that says House Appropriations, House App, and there's zeros all the way down, you can see that House Appropriations at this point has not taken any action on any of these items. So on this first page, as of now, House Appropriations has not taken any action on any of these items. If you turn to page 2, you can see they have not taken any action on any of those items. If you turn to page 3, I don't think we see our first action that's taken that's been recorded in the system. So if you look at Board of Tax Appeals, all right, which is in the middle of the page, you can see in FY26, the House Appropriations Committee added $30,000, okay, in order to pay for small claims hearing officers. So that they put that money into the budget. And I think it had been previously deleted. All right. And so you can sort of walk through here and see each one of the adjustments that have been adopted. And there just aren't that many SGF adjustments that the House Appropriations Committee has adopted so far. If you turn all the way to the back on page 9, as a brief overview, The agencies, in FY 2025, the agencies roughly requested $10.9 billion was their sort of starting point. The LBC, House Bill 2007, deleted $290.4 million from that amount. The House Appropriations Committee so far has added back about $1.6 million, which leaves us at about $10.6 billion for expenditures so far. If you look at FY 2026, the agencies requested about $11.5 billion. The LBC committee has deleted $1.1 billion of those requests. The majority of those are in like Department of Corrections and Board of Regents and Regents institutions. So for that's enhancements inside of higher education and the correctional facility is where the majority of that is. And then they've added back, House Appropriations Committee so far has added back about $3.4 billion, leaving you with about a $10.4 billion request. So that means going right now, with no further adjustments, going from FY 25 to FY 26, you go from $10.6 billion to $10.4 billion, or a reduction of about $250 million or so between the two fiscal years. That was anticipated. There's a large number of one-time costs that are built into the FY 2025 budget, so we expected that SGF number to fall off a little bit as those one-time items begin to fall out of the budget. I will not go over the all funds unless you just really want it in detail. It's going to be duplicative of the document you see before you. But if you look at the very back page on 13, the agency request is $27 billion. The LBC deleted $199.4 million. House Appropriations has added back $1.6 million to give us $26.8 billion as the current FY 2025 total, and then $25.1 billion as the FY 2026 total. And that just gives you a rough idea of where we are from an all funds perspective for where we are as of last Friday inside of House Appropriations. Anyway, with that, I would stand for questions on either the format or the contents of any of these documents.
Questions? Seeing none, Dylan, thank you. Committee, before we move on to our next business, you might look at these sheets, take them with you, and particular like ag, the water is going to be a big deal in ag. If you don't mind, as ag chairman, looking at the water deal, and as commerce chairman, look at the commerce, in particular, and education, look at education, and anything else that anyone on this committee is interested in. Let me know, say, hey, I'd like to look at this too. And, we're just going to try to make sure that we get as many eyes on everything as we can. Senator Petty.
Darlene, I did come up with one question. So as the subcommittees in House Appropriations are looking, I know sometimes there are contracts that an agency might have that are not, the negotiations or whatever is not completed. Has that been taken into considerations when it comes to whether it's considered an enhancement or just a continuation from the prior year budget?
Those are given into consideration. In uncompleted contracts, we try to let the committee know when those contracts are in negotiation, completed, signed, depending upon the various statuses. We had that conversation in relationship to the Larned State Hospital this morning for fire services with the city of Larned. They are looking to contract that out, whereas historically those have been taken care of by an on-facility fire department. But training has become a bit of a challenge for that. But we do inform that when there's ongoing negotiations, or in some cases where a contract has been signed and therefore a contractual obligation for those monies has already been made. In most cases, an agency should not sign a contract till they get their appropriation. Get a little cart before the horse there. But clearly negotiations do have to precede the request.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dylan, thank you for your presentation. Performance-based budgeting. Wondered, because they all had to fill the forms out, where are those at, or how can we get hold of them?
Mr. Chairman, we have posted all of those to our website already. They were posted about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. I will send a link for those performance measures to all of the committee members to make it available digitally. We don't print that document because it's 980 pages. However, we do make it available digitally. It is also available through our data visualization. So if you pull up an individual agency and click on the performance-based budgeting document, it'll pop up the performance measures for every single program, and you can page through them through the Tableau interface as well. Just depends on how you want to access it. We have it as available as a PDF. We have it available as through the Tableau interface. Or if you want us to print your copy, we'll print your copy. Just ask.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dylan, appreciate it. Okay, committee, next we're going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 14, providing for continuous state budgeting until amended, lapsed, or eliminated by the legislature, temporary reallocations, and establishing conditions and limitations. We'll start out with revisor's overview. We'll have David Weiss, Office of Revisers of Statute. David, welcome, committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Senate Bill 14 would provide for a continuing budget for the ensuing fiscal years when the legislature and the governor do not enact a new budget bill into law. The existing appropriations provided for in the previous fiscal year that would be in effect for the new fiscal year and all subsequent fiscal years unless and until amended, lapsed, or eliminated by the legislature. Under the bill, no action is needed by the State Finance Council to continue those existing appropriations. There are instances in the bill where the State Finance Council does need to take action in certain instances. And again, kind of the reminder, the State Finance Council is the governor is the chair of the council, and then there's 8 legislative leaders and the chair of Senate Ways and Means and House Appropriations on that council. So Finance Council action would be required if any continuing appropriation is made to match or secure federal funds in excess of the amount required to match or secure those federal funds. In those instances, the funds would not be expended unless approved by the State Finance Council. Then also when there is temporary reallocations made for state general fund accounts or special revenue funds to allow expenditures if there's insufficient monies in those funds or accounts, if there are other funds available that can be reallocated through the process here of the bill by the Secretary of Administration, those reallocations would be subject to approval by the State Finance Council. And those reallocations are limited. First, the Secretary of Administration is to go to the Budget Stabilization Fund, pull the money out of there before going into any other fund or account for those reallocations. And then further, the Secretary of Administration shall limit the total amount of any temporary reallocations to the State General Fund by an amount equal to 9% of the total amount authorized to be expended or transferred by demand transfer from the State General Fund, calculated by the Secretary as of that time for that fiscal year. And then there's also a total cap of $400 million for those other funds other than the State General Fund that could be reallocated under this procedure. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, I know this is a bill, but do we already have a process in place for the continuation of the budget?
David?
Mr. Chairman, currently the state does not have a process for continuing budget. If a budget was not enacted by the legislature and the governor, on July 1st of the ensuing fiscal year, there would be no appropriations at that point until authorized by a bill, Appropriations Act.
Senator Petty.
I guess this is kind of a historical question. Have we had a year where a budget has not been enacted?
David?
Mr. Chairman, to my knowledge, I don't believe so. There was one year I know we were getting kind of into June on some stuff, but I think ultimately the legislature and the governor did pass a bill, and it would take effect July 1st. So.
And then I noticed in the bill, it says, and this is several different times, but I'll just look at line 30 on the first page, that prior to taking any action under this subsection, the Secretary of Administration shall consult with the Director of the Budget and the Director of Legislative Research. Is there a precedence for that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, Senator, a lot of times when we have some sort of certification of a certain amount, if that's kind of unknown in the budget process, there are a lot of times where the Director of the Budget and the Director of Legislative Research will get copies of that certification, the Director of Accounts reports. I think it's just to make sure that everybody's aware of, in both the executive branch and the legislative branch, about how much money is moving around or has been transferred. So it'd be similar in terms of these reallocations, but just, I think, that way, Division of Budget, legislative research, and everybody's kind of on the page, same page as to that money, where it's going.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, David. Next, we'll start out with proponents. Elizabeth Patton, State Director, Americans for Prosperity. Elizabeth, welcome committee.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Chairman. Again, my name is Elizabeth Patton. I am the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Kansas. I was excited to see this bill come up for a hearing. I think that this really does show us the nexus of the good work the legislature has been doing this year to consider our spending habits on a deeper level than we've seen maybe perhaps in some past years. And I think that our state is truly on the cusp of making sure that we are long-term fiscally responsible and also setting us up for a significant amount of economic growth and success. So I just wanted to start by applauding the efforts you guys are doing on that budget front. And essentially, as we all know, the state budget sits at the center of democracy. And under the state constitution, while the governor may have supreme executive power, the legislature power in the state is the budgetary power should be vested in the state House and Senate. What we think is the most beneficial piece of this bill is that Kansas should essentially should adopt spending targets that maintain balance over the medium term and while smoothing out swings from year to year. We have seen in other states like Indiana, Connecticut, and Florida, they do this and they do this successfully, and it has made sure that the budget is staying more flat instead of what we have seen in our state in recent years, that the budget has exponentially grown. I believe last time I checked, it was about 60% over the last 12 years. I mentioned in my testimony, in my written testimony, but there is a study called Rules and Restraint and Government Spending and the Design of Institutions. And the author of that highlights a lot of research showing that states with these automatic continuing resolutions, making this budget simpler and flatter for the long term, spend about 2% less per capita when controlling for other factors too. But we see that savings could fund even more substantial rainy day reserves, pension reforms, or perhaps even more additional meaningful tax relief. Medium-term balance also improves on the unstable and unpredictable annual balance. As we all know, we do this every year, and there are a lot of changes that come in and out of the Kansas budget, but we believe with us being a part-time legislature, this bill lets legislators have more long-term thinking about meaningful long-term results for our state, because you don't have to consider proposals merely to deal with revenue fluctuations. So you're focusing on the signal instead of the noise, which I think a lot of us would feel happens often in budget hearings, is the noise that would let you guys develop and advance real upgrades and meaningful updates to the budget as it stands. We also feel like it would make the state less vulnerable to impositions from Washington. So we all know federal funds run out, but strings are forever. And saving surpluses from good years instead of overspending would build more reserve funds for the lean times. And as more states pursue budget independence, attempted federal overreach would face greater headwinds. Even further, we believe that on the heels of this, setting up pieces like, for instance, maybe a tax revenue buy down with surplus revenues, continuing, like I said, to input some of this money into our rainy day fund, and it would create a cycle of fiscal responsibility for the state that, as I said in the beginning, would put us near the top for growth and efficiency, make us competitive and attractive for both businesses and families and individuals for the long term. And next, the budget should include, we believe, all all expenditures should be included in the budget. So we also think that tax basis rates, tax preferences, everything should be in a comprehensive budget. We believe that would expand the legislator's ability to deliver better results to Kansans, and states that get closer and closer to a real budget are sustainably more efficient than those with a less focused budgeting. We see a lot of major mismatches between spending and revenue sometimes over the years. In the past, we've seen that in our own state, and something like that would be much less likely with everything in one bill. We believe that this would increase smarter spending decisions and allow for Kansans to keep more of their hard-earned tax dollars in their pocket instead of seeing them absorbed into an ever-growing state budget. Kansas is right now the second most governed state per capita in the contiguous United States, and that is measured based on the size of government. We think we can do a lot better for our state than that. And finally, we believe in ACR will provide a default position to help anchor spending at the starting point, and instead of risking a potential shutdown or lengthy fights at the end of session, current spending could continue until a new budget is enacted. We have seen Wisconsin and Rhode Island that have prevented some of those fights, and they were very strategic in 2016 when they had, if you look back on it, a pretty contentious sessions themselves, but they were able to continue to govern and govern well, and the end result was positive. So we believe that the order should be reversed, that the power of the budget needs to be held within the legislature, and that it will increase transparency and collaboration in the process overall. Ultimately, more effective budgeting tailored to the current expected needs. It is what we should pursue as a state. And ultimately, we believe that better systems promote better results, and we look forward to seeing that all Kansans can be a part of this hopefully successful economy that you guys are on the cusp of building. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Questions? Senator Petty.
Elizabeth, I am looking at your, what we've received, not
Sure.
the testimony you just gave. And as I read this, I'm sorry, but I read an implication here that Governor Kelly has done a terrible job as governor in crafting budgets when she's been extremely fiscally conservative and has led this state for the last 7 years very fiscally well. So when I see support a legislature-led budget and removes Governor Kelly's leverage over the budgeting process, what exactly do you mean by that?
I think it's related to any governor. So Governor Kelly is the current governor. And as I said in my testimony, I mean, this is our spending problems haven't been limited to Governor Kelly. And we look in the past, this has been driven largely by members of both parties. But the current governor is Governor Kelly. And we see some spending increases that have been requested that, we don't happen to agree with. But we think that what this bill does is it changes the culture for which budgeting is accomplished in Kansas, and it puts everyone in a much better financial situation long-term, and it prevents some of that tit for tat.
Follow up, I don't know about tit for tat, what exactly that means, but I am reading shutdowns give Governor Kelly the upper hand. So what shutdowns are you referring to?
I think what we've seen is the ability to, so we've all seen at the end of session the ability to say, if then with no budget, then we have this, or there is just, I believe that a lot of times our budget and the fiscal process has been politically weaponized, maybe by everybody towards the end of session. And then things get a little bit challenging, and we see that better governing could occur, and we can eliminate some of those items if we did something like this to keep that status flow going and make better governing decisions that aren't rooted in, like what I said before, the kind of weaponizing some of those financial items that happen with the potential of a shutdown if the budget isn't passed.
Senator Petty.
So So are you somehow implying that there won't be any politicizing of how the budget is passed or worked during this legislative session? You referred to the session. I mean, I've been here now my 13th year, and I'm, politics comes into play throughout the whole session and into the end of the session, and making decisions on how much money is spent, where it's spent. I don't know that, I mean, I don't see how this is changing that.
So the essence of this, what it does is it has that continuing resolution, right? And so it allows for the budget to stay flat. It helps to, I think it very much is self-explanatory, frankly, on how it changes the culture of the way the budget is done. And so the threat of, oh no, we haven't passed a budget, we have to get these things done. And some of those, like what I have said in the past, it takes away that piece of it. It also allows all of you to spend more time with the actual budget and make really smart long-term decisions, not decisions that are under pressure or threat of time that maybe has led to decisions that were maybe less financially successful in the long term, and that has been on all sides. And we think that something like this eliminates that argument, and it helps make sure that we've got a flatter budget, longer term budget for the future, and allows you guys to dig in the place that you really need to, and it helps eliminate some of that weaponizing.
Lastly, Mr. Chair, this doesn't, unless I missed this continuous budget, providing for contingent, doesn't come into place until after July 1 if there's no budget in place. Is that correct?
I'd have to look at the bill. It's not my bill. I saw the bill for hearing, and I am speaking to it. I saw it on calendar, and I thought this is a fantastic idea and aligned with our policy. So I'd have to look at the bill.
Well, I'm very disappointed about your weaponizing and speaking against the governor. She's done an excellent job, and this testimony doesn't reflect that at all.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Elizabeth. This is something that's kind of a new concept to me because honestly, the idea of an ongoing resolution kind of makes me a little bit nervous, especially with what we've seen has happened on the federal level. However, let me make sure that I understand this correctly. The basic premise is that if we start with last year's budget, the worst thing that we can do is nothing, and that the budget stays flat for the entire next year.
Correct.
And that's your argument, is that if that's what happens, by default, that keeps spending down because no increases were adopted.
Correct.
Okay, in addition to that, historically, and I've been very much critical of our budget process in the past, so I look forward to seeing how some of these changes actually play out and whether it's beneficial. Because in the past, we've started out with a governor's budget, which is always increasing, constantly increasing. Whereas if we adopt this, we're starting out, worst case, with last year's budget, and then specifically only adopting any increases that we as a legislature want to adopt, instead of, per se, being the bad guy and removing the things that the governor has recommended.
Correct.
Am I, okay.
Yep.
Thank you for helping me understand that. I was trying to simplify it down so that I understand kind of what the goal here is. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And potentially we need to change this to where it becomes effective on register. I don't agree that the fiscal House of Kansas has been conservative or well managed at all for several years. Now, to my question, and I apologize, you're the one who happens to be at the podium when I thought of this question. So it may be something, since you're not an attorney, Director Patton, that we may, Mr. Chairman, want to direct to staff. Now, my question is, a few years ago, the Kansas Supreme Court determined that the legislature wasn't spending, quote, adequate, close quote, amounts of money for education. And the Supremes threatened, if I remember correctly, and at one point they didn't even allow the treasurer to write a check to schools. Now, so if the Supreme should threaten to say, well, we're not going to allow funding to go to this, that, or another thing, Senate Bill 14 will not affect that.
Correct.
That, okay.
Correct. No.
That would be my understanding, so the
That's my
Supreme still
understanding.
have the same supreme authority that they think they have at this time over the budgeting process. Okay. I just thought I would ask that because of the fact that there could be some who will say that, well, never mind, we'll leave that alone. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, I'd also like to point out we have written-only opponent, Mike Burgess with Disabilities Rights Center, that's in your packet. Neutral, we have none. Is there anybody in the audience that was wanting to speak on this bill? Seeing none, we will close our hearing on Senate Bill 14. Committee, that concludes our work for today. We are adjourned. Thank you.